Hi guys, Shavua Tov, as we say in Israel. Here in Israel, it means good week. Right after Shabbat, it's Sunday, Yom Rishon, the first day. Hope all of you had a beautiful Shabbat. It's so great to be here again, to be back, being able to share on this platform. I wanted to continue in the series I started. I made an introduction, but I haven't made the video following it about prophecy and how it can relate to our times, right? And looking at the Jewish prophets and understanding what they came to talk about and how they predicted and saw the future and the flow of history, and gave advice and counsel and rebuke in hard times to the Jewish people and as extent to humanity as a whole, about what path they had to take in order to reach the ultimate goal, right? So first I want to talk about a little bit about Tanakh and the books of the prophets. Today I want to focus on a single prophet called Amos, right? But first I want to give a little bit of background. I gave a little in the introduction already, but focus more on the books of the prophets, right? So I said that the Tanakh, right, the collection of the Jewish Bible, there are 24 books, right? It's divided into 3 sections, right? And the first is the Chumash, so it's the actual Torah, the big Torah scroll that we hold in Shul, and it's the one that Moses wrote on Mount Sinai and received from God, as we believe, and we say every day that we believe. 5 books of Moses. And after that is the Nevi'im and the Ketuvim, which means the prophets and the writings, right? So the Nevi'im, which is what I really want to focus in this series, the prophets, is divided into really 2 sections within the Hebrew canon, right, and within Hebrew scholarship, into what we call the Nevi'im Rishon, which are the first Nevi'im, the first prophets. Nevi'im means prophets, and the later prophets, the Nevi'im Rishonim, right? The Nevi'im Achronim, the later prophets, right? So the Nevi'im Rishonim consists of 4 books, and it's much more chronological. It kind of follows straight after Moshe dies, right? The Jews are at the border of Israel. It's everything they've worked for, everything Moshe Rabbeinu has worked for, but God, for very mysterious reasons, which maybe we can talk about, doesn't let Moses go into the land. Moses has to give his power to his second man, which is Joshua, right? So the first book of the prophets is called Joshua, right? So it recounts the story of how the Jews come into Israel and actually conquer the land, right? And the next 3 books talks about the kingdom of Israel, of the Jews in Israel. And the 4 books are Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, right? So it talks about all the conquests and all the battles that the Jews have to go through to conquer Israel. And it talks about how the Jews go from a rule of the judges, right? They go through a rule of judges to a rule of kings, right? The Jews asked for kings. They didn't have kings. The kings were something of the other nations. But the Jews asked, we want a king. So God grants them a king, right? So we have Saul, which is the first king, and then King David, which is like the most famous king, right? He wrote all the Psalms and all the Tehillim. So all of this is in the book of Samuel, of Judges and Kings, right? And then we see that there's a rupture in the kingdom of Israel, right? So after King Solomon dies, right, which is King David's son, right, the kingdom splits. And so 10 of the 12 tribes, there's 12 tribes of Israel that came into the land. 10 of them go to the north and they create this kingdom they call the kingdom of Israel, while the kingdom of Judah stays in Yerushalayim. And these are the descendants of Solomon. And they think each one claims to be, right, the rightful kingship. And so there's a split within the Jewish kingdom and the Jewish people. Right, so this is kind of a big overlook, but we see that so it's very political. These 4 books are all about the politics and what happens, and it's really from a biblical perspective how these kings directed and conducted the Jewish people according to Moses' law, right? But we see that in these books we start to see the role of the prophet and the figures of the prophet. So we see the first prophet is Samuel, is the seer, and then later the bigger prophets Eliyahu and Elisha, right? And we see that these prophets are shown as intermediaries between God, which is the supernal realms, the heavens, the divine plan, right, and the lower realms, the political figures, the kings, right, the ones that get nitty and gritty, want to conquer land and fight, right? And the prophets are always there as counselors. and giving rebuke to, and giving the kings harsh words when they're not following God's plan, right? Because this world, this lower world, has a lot of enticements, and power is very enticing, and conquering land, etc. While God's plan is lofty, and it's very moral, right? And it's very spiritual, and it's very internal, right? And the prophet is always trying to lead the people and the kings to this place, to remember why we're here for. We're not here to just conquer land. We're not here just to fall into an enticement of power, right? We're here for a larger plan, and this is God's world, and God knows where He's taking us, right? So this takes us to the 12 later books of the prophets, and these later books are much more poetic, and they recount like it's each individual prophet talking about their visions, right, and about the actual prophecies that they receive from God, right? Because as I talked about in the first volume, and I was just mentioning here, the prophet is like this, such a singular figure, is picked out by God, right, and taken above, and shown His divine plan in some shape, way, or form. They're taken above time, right? And we see that God has this masterful plan for all of creation, right? It's this redemption. They had this vision of a redemption, of a world of peace, a world of prosperity, this golden age for the earth, right? But God doesn't want to just take us there. He wants us, all of humanity, to grow to that place, to take us to that place, to build it out of our own hands, right? Which is a lot I talk in my other tours and my other videos. And so the prophet is constantly, they're in time, right? And they're seeing the circumstances of the people, but they're constantly taken above to see the actual blueprint and see the actual purpose of creation. So they create this bridge, and then they come down, and with this higher perspective, now they're able to give counsel and to help the people here, like shepherds, to be able to change their ways so that they can reach this plan, right? And so we see, though, that a lot of the words of the prophets are very harsh, because sometimes when they go to this beautiful high place of perfection, they come back down and they see how much of a disconnect that the people down here living to that supernal divine plan, then they're forced to be harsh, right? And they're also shown visions of a lot of visions of judgment and destruction, right? Because when they're down here, they come back down in time, and they're seeing that point. They're seeing it through a filter of darkness, of destruction, of immorality, right? So it's kind of like the concept I've used before with this whole process is kind of like Waze, right? Like a GPS program. Like the destination is always final, right? The destination is fixed, right? Which is this plan that God has for all of us. But depending on the choices we make and the turns we make, right? Because God gives us free will, then that path changes, right? And the prophet is always playing with this game, and he's always having to look through these filters and trying to see how he can direct the people to that point. But when the people, right, and us as humanity take very bad decisions, then the prophet is forced to take a turn into the darkness, right? And he can only see the final point, the final direction through this filter of judgment and destruction, right? So it can be a bit scary, but we also learn that negative prophecy never has to be fulfilled, right? The final point is fixed, but the path can always change. So the prophet is only looking from the point in time that he is, but we see that if he's seeing negativity, if the people change and the people repent, right, and they follow God's word, there's still an opportunity to undo that negative prophecy, right? Which takes us to Amos, right? Which is this prophet I want to talk about. He lived in the reign of King Jeroboam II. So this was a king of the northern kingdom of Israel, like I said, after the kingdom split. And he ruled for 40 years. And we learned that this was a period of great prosperity, political success. Jeroboam was able to make peace with his neighbors and to reconquer land, and to make peace also with the southern kingdom of Judah. And so this is great economic prosperity, right? And as we know humans to be, what happened when there was all this prosperity and everything, instead of using it for the good and thanking God and being grateful and strengthening in this moral life and this moral understanding, this led to actually a decline of moral standards, right? So Torah laws began to be abandoned, and there began to be a lot of idol worship and building altars where there shouldn't be altars, right? Because we understand there can only be one altar, which is in Yerushalayim, right? And it's very symbolic. It means that all of humanity has to have one central focus. But when people start worshiping idols and start creating different altars, and everyone is just serving their own aims, and they just want to use spirituality for their own gain or for their own purposes, and we lose this focus of a centered, unified purpose for all of humanity, which is what God desires for us, right? So Amos, he was a shepherd, right? And he was chosen by God to show the people how they were going astray, right? And so his words are very harsh and very strong. It was a time when people really abandoned their moral standards, right? And so Amos would often show up in places of idol worship, and he would stand up and he would announce God's anger and God's rebuke. And he was often threatened, but he never backed down. He had total faith in what he had seen and the words that God had given him, right? And it's interesting because although he was very harsh, and we'll see he has 9 chapters, not only does his last chapter end with a beautiful accounting of the redemption, but he's always constantly reminding people of God's kindness and how much God has done for them, right? Because I think this is, and for me too, I feel is the deepest hurt, right? Is when you do something for someone and so much, and you see them succeed, right? Because they were being prosperous, etc., and then they turn their back on you, right? And they no longer be grateful, and they take everything you gave them and go and spend it and give it on other things, right? That's just not how, like, a good friend, a good husband, a good partner, right? That's not how they treat their partners and their friends, right? So I want to look at, right, because God is our partner and we're trying to work together with him. So when he's kind to us, we want to be kind back to him, not turn our back on him. So I want to look at this chapter from Amos, chapter 8, and just read a little bit. It's a very famous, there's some famous verses here, and I want to relate this to our times, right? Because already we can start to see the parallels, right? Because in our modern world, we have so much prosperity. We have everything we could ever need, right? Food at your door, information without end, technology at your fingertips, the whole world at your fingertips, right? Whole library of Alexandria at your fingertips, right? And what are we doing with most of our time? And what are we doing with most of our resources, right? Just spending it playing games and spending it in vanity and scrolling, when really all these tools are given to us so we can build and explore and conquer and grow, you know? And instead we just fall into our habits and fall into these lowly moral standards, right? Which are so, just selling ourselves so short, and just ingratitude. We've been taking everything so for granted, right? All these resources, even air conditioning, something so easy as air conditioning, or even, you know, a sanitation system. We take it so for granted, right? And then we complain when we don't have any of these things. So now we're starting to see the parallels also with Corona and what maybe Corona is coming to tell us, right? But first I want to read this, right? So it says, "In that day declares the sovereign Lord, the songs in the temple will turn to wailing. Many, many bodies flung everywhere, silence. Hear this, you who trample the needy and do away with the poor of the land, saying, when will the new moon be over that we may sell grain, and the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat? Skimping on the measure, boosting the price, and cheating with dishonest scales, buying the poor with silver and the needy for a pair of sandals, selling even the sweepings with the wheat. The Lord has sworn by himself, the pride of Yaakov, I will never forget anything they have done." Right, so one of the things that happened in that time was that with all this economic prosperity, there started to be an oppression of the poor. Right, so when there started to be this well of wealth coming in, instead of redistributing it, right, and trying to create a fair society, a fair community, the people in power took it into themselves and hoarded it, right? And we understand that none of anything in this world is ours, right? Everything is a gift from God, right? We work for the things we have. That's true, and we can work very, very harsh for them. But the whole mechanism of how it comes to us, how the wealth comes to us, is beyond our hands, right? And so when we receive all these amounts of wealth, right, and we're acting as if it's ours in a very tangible way, right? And we're starting to create these divisions, right? And thinking that some people don't deserve this wealth like we do, and that we're somehow separate from the society around us. Then it starts to get ugly, right? Because that's not what society is meant to be. That's not what humanity is meant to be, right? If humanity is one body and one soul, we're trying to send the healing and the wealth to all the parts, right? And we do believe in Judaism, we do believe in hard work. And we do believe that you gain your wealth, right? We're only required to give 10% of our money, right? But that 10% is something, it means something. It means that you recognize that you have a part in the whole, right? So when people were saying, may the Sabbath be ended that we may market wheat, right? So the Sabbath, the Shabbat, was given to us as a day of rest, right? As a day of holiness. But if we're giving away all the aspects of holiness in our life and all the aspects of spiritual growth and inner growth in order to just keep this game of wealth and keep this game of accumulation and of power, then that's when God starts getting angry, right? And we have to understand God's anger is like a parent's anger, right? When he sees a child going wrong, right? He wants to see us go in the right path. And when we're not doing that, right, as mature, responsible adults with knowledge and consciousness, we know what we're doing, we're not little kids. And God gets angry, right? And he sends people like Amos to tell us what's happening, right? So, just skipping a little ahead. The days are coming, declares the sovereign Lord, when I will send a famine through the land. Not a famine of food or a thirst for water, but a famine of hearing the words of the Lord. People will stagger from sea to sea and wander from north to east, searching for the word of the Lord, but they will not find it. Right? So I think this is especially, it talks a lot about our times, and this is a very famous verse, very famous pasuk, right? Because we see that nowadays we have everything, right? We have, like I said, we have water, we have food, everything, right? But seemingly there's something lacking in the core of humanity, some strive, some thirst for something that goes beyond just this system that is just circular of 9 to 5, 9 to 5, 9 to 5. And we see that recently, so many, like the radicalism, religious radicalism, and also political radicalism, and also the springing of spirituality, all of these are symptoms of something missing at the core, right? People are looking for some type of meaning. People are looking to belong to something. So it can turn into a beautiful pursuit, which is a spiritual pursuit, which is a return to God, and it's what it should bring us to. Or it can turn into something very ugly, which is taking sides and saying, I'm a Democrat, I'm a Republican, I'm going to die for this, etc. Because there's nothing else to look for, so you look for a team to root for, to be a part of, right? We see that God tells us that people stagger from sea to sea and wander from north to east, searching for the word of the Lord. Right, so what's the word of the Lord? Is this satiation, this inner satiation, satisfaction, right? We see that, now in modernity, people are traveling all over the place, and they're doing world travels and looking and searching and always going from their place, never satisfied with what they have, right? And we see that this is not, it's never going to render fruit, right? Because there's no end to it, It's beautiful to travel the world, and how many countries can you see, but at what point does it just becomes one more travel and one more travel, or one more game and one more game, or one more club night, one more party. There's nothing to find there in the end, This is exactly what God is saying. There's going to be a thirst in the land, right? And it's not for water, but it's for something much deeper, right? And this takes us back. So how does this all relate to Corona? Corona is the mechanism, I strongly believe, to put all of these things in perspective, right? Because again, with so much prosperity and wealth, we were falling into too much comfort, right? Too much comfort. We're taking too much for granted. Accumulating wealth after wealth, technology going off the charts, right? But where we're going, no perspective, no direction, right? And what did Corona do? It just kind of put a brick in everything. It says you have to stay home, right? And realize everything that you have, right? Realize how much you have, and how little or how much you had taken for granted it. Movement around the world, movement back and forth, all this entertainment, all this arena, sports arenas and bars and everything just closed, from one month to another. Just showing how fragile and how fragile the things we took for granted are, and how they're really not in our hands, right? And how this invisible thing that just floats in the air and that nobody can really put a hand on, can touch, can make all the things we took for granted and for certain just stop, right? So what is God trying to tell us? What is the universe trying to tell us? Is take a step back and see where you're going, right? What's your direction? Do we all have a unified purpose, right? Is there one altar, or are we all building our own altars, right? To vain entertainment, to vapid scrolling, We're all seeking for something. All of these are methods of, they all fill some thirst, a very small thirst. And then it makes us thirst more and more and more. It was getting to a place where it's no longer sustainable, right? And God is showing us incredible kindness by stopping us before it gets to that point of really becoming very ugly, right? Because it's already become pretty ugly. And how many times have we been at the brink of destruction and of war? I mean, and it's boiled over several times. If you look at the U.S. with these riots, right, and people turning into a thing about race. Of course, there's race divisions, and of course, there's all these divisions. But we're just trying to create more and more teams and create sides just so we can take out all this anger, because we know that we're lacking something at the core, right? We have to ask, how are we gonna fill that core? Where are we gonna look towards, right? Amos says, many bodies flung everywhere. What's happening now, with all the corona, and also like the masks, right? Of having to hide our faces. And I don't want to give an opinion if the masks work or not. That's not my job. But I'm saying, even symbolically, the fact that the world is now filled with masks, right? And it's like we can't talk to each other because we've turned our face to each other, to God, right? Now we have to cover our mouths, right, until we can find the right words to say. So anyways, Amos ends with a beautiful vision of the final redemption, right? And he promises that God never goes back on his promise. That he has this vision that he cares so much about, and that he's been working so hard because he feels all the world's pain. He feels it. Right? But nevertheless, Amos says that, okay, even though we're going through rough times right now, and it's uncertain about what our structures, what the things we held dear are going through right now, there's still light at the end. Because this creation is beautiful. And it's meant to be beautiful. And each time we don't beautify it, and we just use it, we kind of prostitute the land just for these mechanisms and these games that have no end, then we really hurt the world, and we hurt the earth, and we hurt the environment. We see how much we've hurt the ecosystems and how things are so out of place just so we can have, a faster internet or faster whatever, more convenience, and what's the end of that? We want to make this life as beautiful as possible. Right, so here, just to end on a positive note, right, chapter 9 says, the days are coming, declares the Lord. Skipping a little bit. They will rebuild the ruined cities and live in them. They will plant vineyards and drink their wine. They will make gardens and eat their fruit. I will plant Israel in their old land, never again to be uprooted, for the land I have given them. So nature, no matter how much you hate nature, can always regrow. And yes, there's a lot of permanent damage we can make, a lot of species that have gone extinct, etc., etc. But the core of life always keeps pumping, and no matter how much we hurt it, it's going to come. So why are we going to keep hurting it? Why do we want to, make the regrowth process harder than it already is? Make the healing process harsher and harsher. That's what judgment means. That's what, quote unquote, the apocalypse means. Right? It means either we can go straight into this into this place of peace and of cooperation, right, and of a unified humanity, or we're gonna have to go through a bit of, a little bit of a washing machine type situation, right, where we're gonna have to undo all the things that we held dear that were fake, right, and have to let go of so many illusions, and it's gonna hurt because we held so much onto them, right? Onto power, onto money, onto greed. It's something that's gonna come in a day when we realize it's not worth anything. It's gonna be very hard to let go. But we can expedite the process and start letting go now, and actually seeing the beauty in nature, right? Anyways, that's my video here for Amos and Corona and modernity. Said a lot. Hopefully I'll have another video, a few more videos. I don't know if we can look at more verses. If you guys have any feedback, comments, just know I know there's great people out in the world who are sticking hard through it and who believe in the good. And these people are silent, and they might not be on the news, and they might not be screaming as loud, right, on the senior news corporation videos and stuff like that. But you gotta believe that that's the majority of the world, and that most of the people want good. We just have to undo this big system and see through the illusions, and realize that everything is here. If we just stop a moment and look at around us, at the trees, at the nature, what we can be grateful for, there's so much. Right? Because God just wants to give us everything. He wants to give us the best life possible. Anyways, thank you so much, guys. Have a beautiful week. I hope to see you guys soon. Always, you can check my site, www.tabernacleofpeace.com. I have more writing up there. Hopefully have more videos soon. And so thank you.